children, our ability to breathe, everything's being impacted by extreme weather events that we did not create, but that are going to affect our communities more than any of them. We've seen that happen. It's happening over and over again.
My name is Elizabeth Jean-Pierre. I'm the Executive Director of Upro, based in Southern Park, Brooklyn. Upro is Brooklyn's oldest funding community-based organization. We are an intergenerational, frontline-led, matriarchal, leaderful organization working at the intersection of racial justice and climate change. And we have developed plans for decarbonizing all of Sunset Park and moving our community to a just transition. Latino communities have always cared about Mother Earth. And what I see is that people are learning more about it, that they're participating at a higher level at their local organizations. We know that we can transform the landscape, that we need solutions. There won't be any transformation unless everyone who is disparately impacted is at the center of decision making in that transformation. We are resilient because we've had to be. That's the only way that we have been able to survive. We're people from the global south, and we look like the future.
What you just saw right now was a video that Resource Media, one of our partners, one of our members, created through their La Madre Tierra initiative. They actually launched the video on the Green Latino social media platform, and it has been highlighted on those social media platforms to support our work. So I would like to take a second to introduce, acknowledge a few team members from the Resource Media organization, so that when you are networking, when we're stepping out into dinner, into the rest of our breakout sessions, you have a minute. If you'd like to connect with them on work to engage Indigenous communities, Latinx communities with effective media strategies, you know who they are. You can reach out to them, introduce yourself, exchange contact information. But I would like to ask Refugio Mata, Senior Program Director of Resource Media, to say that thank you so much, Refugio. I would also like to ask Pilar Montoya if Pilar is here. Pilar is the Executive Director of Resource Media. And if you see Pilar around, if you've met Pilar in any of the breakout sessions, go ahead and, ask her about their work. Ask her about how you can collaborate on this. But thank you so much. Thank you for joining us for this plenary discussion. I would like to hand it over to our moderator, Chris Espinosa. Chris Espinosa is coming to us after 5 years as the Director of Outreach and Engagement at the House Committee on Natural Resources. Before transitioning over to Earth Justice as their Legislative Director, I would like to welcome up Chris Espinosa as our moderator.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to take a moment of personal indulgence here to go off script. Sorry, Meghan, you give me a microphone and that's what happens. I want to say I am so grateful for this space, for all of you, for participating in this organization that is sorely needed in our community. The power, the passion, the relationship building that you all bring and that I get out of every summit I've attended to, it's inspiring to me. And I value it so much. And to me, this organization is essential for the kind of growth and progress that we want to see in our community. So I went onto the website. I paid the $25 to become a full-fledged member of Green Latinos. And what I am imploring all of you to do today, if this institution is something that you value, if this is something that you can see a value for in the work that you do, in the communities that you try to champion and advocate on behalf of, then join me and go to www.greenlatinos.org pay the $25, become a full-fledged member. If you're not sure if you're a member, go onto the website and do it again anyway.
But I just wanted to say that as attendees of the summit, everybody in this room is a member of Green Latinos, in case you weren't sure.
If you value the incredible capacity of the staff of this organization, the world-class advocacy and coordinating and policy analysis that comes out of the Green Latino staff, that to me is worth $25. Go on to the website, join Green Latinos. If you're a member already, do it again anyway. And the last thing I'll say on this is our movement. We have ownership in this. But if we're not growing, then we're not thriving. So after you've paid your $25, call 5 of your friends. Tell them what an amazing experience you had at the Green Latino Summit. And tell them to pay $25 and become a Green Latino member. Thank you to the Green Latinos team. Thank you for all of the work that you do to put on this amazing conference that is a one-of-a-kind experience in the environmental movement. Today we're here to talk about the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Raise your hand if you've heard of the WHEJAC before. All right. Excellent. We have 2 amazing panelists that I'm really excited to talk with today and explore what the WHEJAC is, what they're working on, and how we plug into that work. Before I bring our distinguished panelists up and introduce them, I believe we have a video from Ruth Santiago in Puerto Rico. If you've ever worked with Ruth before, she's an amazing advocate. She's an amazing champion for communities on the island and beyond. She's an Earth Justice board member and a fierce force of nature. And the WHEJAC, that's right. So, without further ado, let's...
I hope the weather in Texas is better than it is here in Puerto Rico. It's scorching hot in southeastern Puerto Rico, and it's been this way for months now. The premature heat wave is a clear sign that the climate crisis is upon us, and as you know, Latin people and other people of color are bearing the brunt of the more frequent and extreme weather events. As part of President Biden's promise to tackle the climate crisis, he created the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, known as WHEJAC. WHEJAC members come from different regions throughout the U.S., and each region is represented in the steering committee. I represent the U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico, in the steering committee. Puerto Rico faces unique climate, energy, environmental, and socioeconomic issues and challenges. The archipelago is considered part of Hurricane Alley, or ground zero of the climate crisis. And the Biden administration should implement policies to address these challenges. Puerto Rico's extreme vulnerability to climate impacts beckons the administration's attention to address the life-threatening challenges to humans, all living things, and the environment in the archipelago. Last year, a group of municipalities in Puerto Rico filed a lawsuit against large fossil fuel companies, where they allege that the production, promotion, refining, marketing, and the sale of fossil fuels has had a primary role in causing the losses, deaths, and destruction of property resulting from the catastrophic storms of September 2017 and their aftermath. The complaint documents rising sea surface temperature of nearly 2 degrees around Puerto Rico, which promotes more intense storms and hurricanes in the archipelago. Puerto Rico is also in the throes of multiple crises, including economic and fiscal restructuring alongside some of the worst impacts of the climate crisis. Climate change driven by anthropogenic actions such as rising sea levels affects coastal and low-lying areas which are destroying beaches, aquifers, and ecosystems generally, and displacing poor and largely Afro-descendant communities in the archipelago. In September 2017, the archipelago was struck by hurricanes Irma and Maria, with devastating impacts to thousands of homes and much of the infrastructure, especially electric energy and water systems, with lethal consequences leading to an estimated 3,000 to 5,000 deaths. Last fall, Puerto Rico was struck by Hurricane Fiona that dumped extreme amounts of rain on the archipelago, knocked down the entire electric system, and led to more increased deaths. 97% of Puerto Rico's electricity is generated from burning fossil fuels. Most of these plants overburden largely Afro-descendant communities. In addition, the archipelago's fossil-fired power generation system relies on centralized transmission and distribution systems that overburden Puerto Rico's rural south. The fossil fuel industry has a strong foothold in Puerto Rico and is looking to expand its operations. Multiple new methane, so-called natural gas-fired power plants are proposed. Government agencies have been largely complicit with the fossil fuel agenda to expand dependence on imported carbon sources instead of moving to distributed renewable energy, such as rooftop solar, which is recommended in multiple studies, including a recent U.S. Department of Energy report that found that Puerto Rico has 4 to 6 times the rooftop solar potential compared to the archipelago's entire energy demand. Community and environmental groups have worked to transform the energy system by advocating for a shift to distributed rooftop or on-site solar installations coupled with battery energy storage systems, power electronics, energy efficiency and literacy, demand response, and similar programs. We Queremos Sol, We Want Sun initiative, a platform to advocate for a more just, equitable, and sustainable energy future in Puerto Rico, and Alianza de Energía Renovable Ahora and other groups are promoting climate, energy, and environmental justice in the archipelago. To add to the energy injustice in Puerto Rico, residents pay 2 to 3 times more than the average U.S. household for their electricity, frequently amounting to the first or second highest electric rates of any U.S. jurisdiction, a situation that threatens to worsen with the proposed rate hikes related to the restructuring of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority bond debt. The Biden administration's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, known as CJUST, classifies approximately 80% of Puerto Rico as disadvantaged. The administration's policies should be geared to the use of the historic amount of FEMA disaster recovery funds to transform the electric system, to live up to its promise to tackle the climate crisis and center environmental justice. As part of the WHEJAC directive to provide independent advice and recommendations to the chair of the Council on Environmental Quality and to the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council, and how to increase the federal government's efforts to address current and historic environmental injustice, we included a specific recommendation to the Biden administration to direct the FEMA funds allocated for the Puerto Rico electric system for distributed renewable energy like rooftop solar, instead of rebuilding the centralized fossil enabling grid. The recommendation was in line with
All right. Ruth, as was mentioned before, is a member of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, and I think that is a good sort of framing and snapshot of some of the efforts that have been undertaken by the WHEJAC. For years now, there has been an advisory council at EPA called the WHEJAC, which has helped to shape the agency's direction and infuse environmental justice into the policymaking of the agency. During the Biden administration, there was a commitment to expand on that work and to infuse it into a whole of government strategy across all agencies. And there was an effort to elevate environmental justice as a priority by standing up the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council to help coordinate those efforts. It's my pleasure to introduce two members of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. Susana Almanza is a founding member and director of Poder. Susana has overcome poverty, prejudice, and segregated schools to face down some of the world's most powerful transnational oil corporations. Susana is an indigenous person of the continent of America and resides in East Austin, Texas. She's a longtime community organizer, educator, mother, and grandmother. She's participated in the civil rights movement as a Brown Beret, taking up issues of police brutality, housing, quality education, and equity in school systems, and healthcare as a right, not a privilege. She co-wrote the 17 Principles of Environmental Justice at the first People of Color Summit in 1991, and has been fighting against environmental racism for over 30 years. Angela Logan has served as a leader in the environmental and climate justice fields for the last 22 years. He got his start as an organizer for Communities for a Better Environment in 2000, when they successfully fought the location of a polluting power plant in Southeast LA. Angelo became the principal co-founder of East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice in 2001, where he served as executive director until 2014, leading the organization's growth from a kitchen table neighborhood group to a community institution with national impact on land use, transportation, and environmental initiatives. For the last 8 years, Angelo has served as the policy campaign director for a national coalition, the Moving Forward Network, housed at Occidental College, coalescing over 50 organizations across 23 states to address the environmental health, justice, and climate impacts of ports, freight, and the global goods movement industry. Angelo now serves at the Liberty Hill Foundation as the Senior Director, Environmental and Climate Justice. Please join me in welcoming both of them. So I'm really excited to have this conversation and to share some of the work that you both have been guiding. I do want to say, just for some table setting, the WHEJAC is a formal body. It is governed under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and there is a process for WHEJAC to present recommendations to the administration in a formal sense. So while I recognize that you both are not here in a capacity representing WHEJAC, you do represent our community's interests in that important work and in that critical advisory council. So as we have this conversation, I would like to hear from both of you, just to get us started, a little about what your background and understanding of how we got to the point of a presidential administration lifting up EJ as a critical priority, and what your view of the work that WHEJAC does and how that impacts policy priorities, funding, the mechanisms of federal public policy on our communities.
Good
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. It's so good to see so many people here. I'm all excited about it. It's been a long struggle, I can tell you, that we've gone through several movements, from the indigenous movement, the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement, the environmental justice movement. All those movements played a role in getting to where we are today with the WHEJAC. It didn't happen at one moment. It happened with everybody being involved and putting under pressure, whether it was to protest, whether it's to research, whether it's writing the books, whether it's having all types of actions, whether it is voting. Voting is another important thing, because of course it's who you put into office that makes a big difference, right? But it's all of these issues that have helped us get to the WHEJAC. He mentioned before there was the NEJAC, and now it's the WHEJAC. And that is, again, now that has led us to the Justice 40 initiative, which is the 40% investment of all the federal funds from the RA and so forth. So it's been a long struggle. It has not been just one movement that got us here today. It's been several movements that helped get us to the WHEJAC, where we are today. I am real honored because at the beginning of Biden, he put in Cecilia Martinez, which one of the Native American persons who was actually the first director of the Environmental Justice Community Council, Committee. Anyway, so Cecilia got on there, which was a very top level, and Cecilia being part of the IEN, the Indigenous Environmental Network. This comes into relationship building and communication. So I want to tell you it's very, very important, because that relationship building and communications is that you always have to work together, because sometimes real good people get in these high positions and they can reach out to you, and knowing you, they know who, hey, come aboard, we need your knowledge, we need your wisdom, we need your expertise to serve on the WHEJAC. And so that's kind of like how I got into the WHEJAC. You heard him say that I've been with BODET for over 30 years, but I've been organizing for over 50 years. And so it's all that collective organizing, not myself, but just collective organizing of thousands and thousands of hours and thousands of times that has led us and helped us stay on this path, right? Because I always look at, I'm on the path of environmental justice. And so that has kind of helped lead us into this path to where we are today as a member representing our communities on the WHEJAC.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying what an honor it is to be up on this stage with Susanna and Chris, and just to be in this room sharing space with you all. It's an honor, and I want to thank Green Latinos staff and the Green Latinos community for just allowing me to be in this space with you all. I want to agree with Susanna on how we got to this point. It really has been these different milestones throughout history where there's groundswells that are happening in every corner of our country, where people are coming together and really building power to influence policymakers. And it's not necessarily happening in a coordinated effort, but in some cases it is. And I think the administration is starting to recognize the power that we're starting to build. And when we come together concerned around environmental health and justice issues, couple that with folks from working class, working poor communities of color, like that can be a really powerful force, and I think the administration really recognizes that. So that's one of the reasons that now the administration is really uplifting environmental justice, and I believe we're in a moment, and at this point in time, it's really important for us to really advance environmental justice and recognize that all the work that we do folds into environmental justice work, right? And so now it's time to really push administration, push agencies, push WHEJAC, push NEJAC to really move forward and forge more progressive policies within the environmental justice and climate justice space. I want to say that, we play a role in advising to the administration and all the administrative agencies, the interagency agencies on environmental justice. And for the WHEJAC, environmental justice is very broad. So we're making recommendations that intersect with everything, our lived environment, right? Our lived experience. And that's really important, and there's opportunity there. But I would say, just from my perspective, the real power comes to being in space with all these amazing leaders that sit at the WHEJAC, that represent communities across the country and the territories. And there's a lot of great people, smart folks on WHEJAC, and folks that come before WHEJAC making recommendations. But as individuals, we're not as smart or as powerful as when we come together collectively. So sitting at this table, building collective power, knowledge, it's really powerful, and that's the biggest success. And so we're trying to use that space, not just to make recommendations, but to help to foster a bigger, stronger, better movement so that we can advance environmental justice.
That's great. Thank you both. Angelo, you talked about this unique moment that we're in. And I think sometimes when I talk to advocates, folks that work on environmental priorities, there's a sense that in some cases with this administration, we are taking a step backwards, but there's also this work that's happening to elevate environmental justice and equity and infuse it into the DNA of federal policymaking. And I think two things can be true at the same time. You can make progress and also not make progress. And so as we look at the work that the WHEJAC is undertaking and better understand how that is going to change the landscape for what we need from our federal partners, give us a sense, if you could, both of you, what some of those major priorities are that WHEJAC is undertaking now to shape what the future of regulatory decisions and policy making and funding is going to be for our communities.
Yeah, so when we started the WHEJAC, we had three parts in our charge. The first was making recommendations on Justice 40, the program in totality, the screening tool, and the environmental justice executive order. And we made recommendations on all of those, and we're happy to say that the president signed an executive order recently on environmental justice. And throughout the process, one of the things that we really wanted to actuate is that these policy levers aren't just the moment in time, right? That they will be institutionalized within the administration and within the U.S. government. So for instance, within the Environmental Justice Executive Order, they established an office, right, Environmental Justice Office. They established staff, permanent staff that aren't appointed positions, but that will be in that position even if we get a change of administration. So kind of almost replicating what the opposition has done is like institutionalize parts and pieces within the government so that no matter what happens at the election, we have folks that are in the administration so that we can have our folks in there as well, no matter what happens. The other thing is that beyond the recommendations, it's my impression that our common goal is to figure out ways to support and foster you all, right? As you come before WHEJAC, that we take that information, that take your power, take your concerns, and elevate it. We're just a recommending body. We don't have any power to make any decisions except for making recommendations. But when we have all of you behind us, we can really push the envelope and hold our administration accountable to all of the questions and concerns that you bring to us. So I want to encourage you all to use us, use this platform, use this venue to advocate for your concerns. There's no other place that you can, present your case at any higher level than at WHEJAC, because then we directly report to the administration. So I want to encourage you to do that. We're actually going to be holding an in-person meeting in Phoenix, Arizona next week, and there's opportunity for you all to testify. And so I encourage you to do that. It's really important. It might seem like you're just talking into thin air, but we're listening and we're taking in as much information as possible. And what we do is we take those concerns and we take on those as additional recommendations that we make. We elevate them at the highest level. So we've taken on issues around the different power plant policies. We've taken on rooftop solar. We've taken on the NAC standards. We've taken on a couple of different elements to elevate it to the highest level possible. So I encourage you to participate in the process.
Yeah, and I want to encourage everybody, like Angela said, so if you go to WHEJAC.gov, you can still do your written comments. You can't sign up for testimony because that time period already ended, but the time period for sending in comments is still there. And the public hearings are usually held every month, right? Or at least, if not every month, every other month. And so it's really, really important to sign up. It's virtual, and then you also can do in person. Like Angela said, next week it's in Phoenix, Arizona, so it's really important. But what I want to add is that, everything is political. People say, I don't like to get into politics, and I say, I don't know a damn thing that's not political. Everything is political. So, let's be honest, it was people of color who got Biden into office. If you look down at the breakdown, who got into office? It was a Latino and African American who got Biden into office. And so we've been pushing for such a long time for all these programs and to address the legacy pollution that has been in our communities for, I can't even tell you how long it's been, because in some communities it's been close to 500 years, right, in that whole struggle. And so, this is really real. We're at a time now where I always say there's a window that opens, and we gotta go through it because that window can close, and then we go squeaky slow at it, right? But we've worked at changing a lot of these policies where if you look at the CJS screening tool, for the first time, it looks at income, it looks at your housing cost burden, it looks at health, it looks at what's around you, it looks at all of these issues, right? But the one thing it doesn't look at is race, And so, because the Biden administration is afraid that the Republicans will challenge the whole system if we put race in there. But the Bob Bullard TCU has come up with another screening tool that you can also use that does include race. It doesn't mean that when you go to funding that you don't use race. You can use race. You can tell your story, and that's what we're telling people. Because there is $48 billion that's going to go to communities of color, to disadvantaged communities. This has never happened in the whole history. Never, okay? Never happened. It's $30 for $48 billion. It's supposed to go to disadvantaged communities. And so we have to make sure that we step up, we're knowledgeable about it, we partner with each other, and that we go after that funding, because that funding belongs to us. We worked hard to get there, and it belongs to our communities, and it is to help our communities, it is to clean up our communities, it is to build our communities, it is to take care of the health of our community, it's about housing, it's about transportation, it's about climate. All of these things are precedent setting. It's never happened before, and it's taken us all of this time to get here to this particular point. So it's very important, and we as WHEJAC members, we pass this information to as many community members and different setting for the scoring is too damn high. So we have to challenge the Biden administration that the percentiles in giving out this funding is too high in a lot of areas. And so we need as many people to testify, because this is the first time. It doesn't mean they won't change it, because they need to change it. You know, because we have people in the federal administration who are constantly looking at maps and stuff. They don't really know what's happening in your community, you know. They don't really know. You're on the ground and you know exactly what's around you. And so it's important that you be involved in this process, is what happened, because we don't know. We don't know. We're hoping that we'll vote again with our bodies there, and that people will come out, and that, you know, we won't have another administration that's going to set us back another 100 years, right? Because this is about climate, and for the first time, they know that indigenous knowledge, place-based knowledge, was really the answer. We always had the answer, and they're finally realizing it because of all the devastation that is happening to the earth, and it's because of all the greed that they're doing, that now, you know, we are the ones suffering. We can't get in a jet and go to another state if there's flooding. You know, we can't just get up and go. We definitely can't go to the moon, you know, unless you're friends with Musk, you already got a ticket or whatever, you know. But I wouldn't want to go, because I know they're just trying to destroy another place, right? And so we really got to work together to make sure that we make those testimonies that like Logan said. We're taking notes, and if so many people, 100 people all are testifying the same thing, that's a flag. It's got to be addressed. It's got to be addressed, and so we got to make sure that we're paying attention to what's happening at the WHEJAC and the testimony, because we do have the opportunity to make a lot of changes, you know, and change a lot of the policies.
I wanted to comment a bit on the one step forward and 2 steps backwards. So, you know, this is a real issue, right? This administration is not like their record shows that they're not truly anchored in environmental justice and climate justice. We've seen tons of actions, the deals that they've done around the budget, the permitting, the pipeline, you know, agreements and so forth. We know that this administration is not perfect by any means, but there's a lack of confidence, you know, in this administration. But it's not that we should have confidence in the administration. We should have confidence in that we are going to influence, that we're going to push the administration to respond to our power. And if we retract, if we decide to retreat, then they're just going to slip further into the steps backwards. And we're in a moment right now where I think we need to really take this as like a tipping point. We just need to force our power, because we got to this point because administration is responding to our power. And we can flex that, or we can retreat. And we can allow for the administration to shape our environment, or we can help to shape our environment by influencing them, flexing our power, and pushing them over the edge so that they can be real policymakers for environmental justice and climate justice. So I just wanted to make that point, because it's not like we are like, you know, Biden's our leader and we believe in him, right? We're here trying to like push and influence his decisions based on his analysis of where power lies.
That's excellent, and that's so true. And I know that it can feel sometimes like the best approach is to pull back, but I think what I hear you saying is we need to lean in. Both of you have shared some of the progress that WHEJAC has made so far in implementing the Justice 40 initiative, in providing data and transparency around how our communities are being impacted by these issues through the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. For those who have not yet seen the executive order on environmental justice, we will be sure to share that with you. because I really feel like there are some groundbreaking statements and directives in that executive order. It recognizes the historic role of racism in impacting environmental outcomes. It prioritizes and highlights the cumulative pollution impacts of all of the multiple pollution sources on our communities. And it identifies as key goals cementing environmental justice and equity into the regulatory process across all agencies. And so we have a clear sense of the work that you both and others on the WHEJAC have invested and what it's led to. But it's very easy to lose that progress from administration to administration. And so I'm curious to hear from you both as we move forward and as we build on that progress. What is the future work of the WHEJAC? How can we support you in advancing that? And how can you support us in driving to better outcomes for our communities in that work?
That's a lot. That's a lot, but yeah, I don't think that regardless, and we've seen it when we had Republicans in office, we couldn't stop because our communities are still suffering, right? I mean, we're still living with pollution, we're still living with cancer, with death, with impacts, negative impacts to the environment. So there's nothing that we can do. We can't stop. We have to keep going forward regardless. And I think that's the important part. But I think in the WHEJAC, we have to continue. Like I said, we're going to have to check where the money really goes. Does the money really go to the community? So there's a lot of tracking and monitoring that's going to have to take place to make sure that that money that was earmarked says, well, nobody's really going after the money, nobody's giving the money, so now we're going to move the money to somewhere else. So we see that happen at city and state level, right? Because of some of the criteria, we want to also document that if somebody got denied because they didn't meet the criteria, what was that criteria? Because the only way we can make sure that those funds get there is that we change the criteria. If the criteria is not right, then we're going to have to change it. So right now, WHEJAC has to really follow the money. We have to make sure that our communities are getting the funding that they're supposed to be getting, and also making sure that the regulations that we need to pass, right, are going to get our suggestions to those regulations and those policies, those wordings that we really need to continue to work on. And I know that there's still a lot of work to be done on the Indigenous working group, because the Indigenous working group, they follow a lot of different policies. They're on reservations, and they have different types of government. There's all these issues as to who's going to make the decisions as to how those Indigenous Native groups get the funding, and make sure that they get the funding that they need, because they're in a whole different level of designation in themselves. And so that's another thing that we're still working on as an Indigenous person, is working with the different Native groups to make sure that they're not left out of this whole process. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we're only on 2 years. So we served 2 years, and we just got, some of us are going to continue, not everybody, but some of us are going to continue for another 2 years. That's how long the assignment is for the WHEJAC. And so, and just what little I mentioned, that's a whole 2-year process of really making sure we're following up on what needs to be done, listening to all the comments and the testimony, and looking at what categories they were at, and what priorities we need to head for, and do we need to make another working group or committee to look at things that were brought up that we weren't really looking at. Because gentrification and land use, there's nothing in there. But if you listen to the testimony of what's happening to the loss of the land and the displacement of people of color, it's a very prominent issue. And so there are issues that we really need to address that are still happening, and there's a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I echo everything that Susanna said. I think, you know, we just continue to keep on keeping on, right? We do what we do, regardless if we're under a Republican administration or a Democratic administration. We have the same agenda, and we just continue to push and continue to speak power, truth to power. And I think that that's one of our roles within WHEJAC, we continue to push our agenda for environmental justice and making sure that, you know, communities are able to represent and speak for themselves on their needs and their issues. And so it's really important for us to kind of continue to play that role regardless of, you know, who's in office and who's representing, you know, any of the districts. You know, one of the very specific thing that I think that we could do as WHEJAC, but then also within the community, is using the environmental justice executive order as a tool. So we're going to work for the next 2 years making sure that this executive order is actually implemented, making sure that we articulate all the tools available to communities to be able to use that to advance your work. And so that's a very specific thing that I would like for the WHEJAC to be able to do and to connect with the community, because, you know, at the end of the day, an executive order is just a piece of paper. If we don't implement it, it's useless. If we don't use it as a tool, it's useless. So it's one way in which we have worked to build the influence to get the president to pass this executive order, and we can either let it sit or we can use it, right, to our advantage. So we need to use it for our advantage and then build on that to continue to build power for our communities. So that's one specific kind of way that I see WHEJAC and the communities really, you know, using this as a venue, as a point of entry.
Absolutely, thank you both so much for that. We have the benefit of having your presence here with your expertise, both on the WHEJAC, but also as advocates and champions of these issues. I want to open it up to the participants to ask any questions of our panelists, whether it be on the work of the WHEJAC or understanding the executive order, or even about their own personal experiences in this work. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand. I see someone in the back.
With APA, with the other things, every time, like I have this idea of the beacons, like churches, when they, when the hurricanes come, you close down, and when they left, you put this, like a lighthouse with the beacons, so people can put the insulin there, they can have, you know, emergency in these places. But what happens? Because we are in region 2, they just tell, oh, we gave the money to another geographical place. But we are here, nobody help us. We have to help
was there conversation within the WHEJAC of how language plays a role in policy that affects WHEJAC?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very critical conversation that happened within WHEJAC. Actually, Juan Paras, who usually is at these convenings, at these gatherings, is a staunch advocate and champion for language justice. And I think both Susanna and Juan really headed that conversation. It's something that's really at the top of our agenda. So definitely we're pushing, we're recommending, we made major recommendations within the environmental justice executive order as well around language justice. And so, and language access. So that is definitely at the top of our agenda.
Yeah. No, and I agree, it's something that we really need to make sure that we keep on the language justice issue. And as far as EPA Region 2, I think that that's another testimony that we need, is to make sure that everybody who's in that region, they have to be communicating with one another, because it's like we've been saying, is that the power is in togetherness and numbers, and that we, even the Green Latinos, can be supported in making sure that Region 2 is taking those testimonies, right, in those particular, through all the different states that belong in Region 2. So those are things that need to also be addressed.
I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Hablan español, ¿verdad? Entienden español, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Sí me escucharon, ¿verdad? Entienden en español. Bueno, qué bueno que hay una orden ejecutiva. Mencionaron que pues simplemente es un papel, ¿verdad? Y que ya lo vimos con DACA. DACA es una orden ejecutiva y todo el tiempo han estado sufriendo los soñadores porque puede desaparecer. Afortunadamente no desapareció con Trump. Pero igual, esta orden ejecutiva puede desaparecer si llega a un gobierno republicano, que están siempre en contra del medio ambiente. Entonces yo consideraría, bueno, se ha hablado de dar testimonios. ¿Qué mejor que dar testimonios en una propuesta de ley? Para que no sea una orden ejecutiva, sino más bien se convierta en una ley. Y ya es más difícil que desaparezca. Y ahí es donde sí entraremos todas las organizaciones con más fuerza, con más poder, para que se convierta en ley. Entonces sí sería importante tal vez, no sé, ver a algún representante o algún senador para que impulse precisamente una propuesta y se convierta en ley. Gracias.
Would you mind repeating the question just a little?
¿Qué era la pregunta? Porque dijo mucho, pero no se la pregunta.
Más que pregunta, más bien es una sugerencia. Buscar a un representante o algún senador federal para que promueva una propuesta de ley y todas las organizaciones promovamos esa propuesta de ley para que la justicia ambiental se convierta en ley y no solamente una orden ejecutiva.
Hemos estado trabajando con el miembro Grijalva, entonces, para pasar la ley de medio ambiente para toda la gente, ¿verdad? Entonces, así hay personas que debemos estar trabajando con, pero son unos cuantos que están aquí, pero es un camino bien largo y se lleva mucho tiempo.
Muchas gracias. Quiero repetirlo en inglés. I do want to repeat the question briefly in English. This question, or it was more of a statement, a suggestion than a question, suggesting that this be proposed as a bill so that it can be implemented as a formal law. That way organizations can rally and support around something that's actionable and concrete. So thank you for that. We think we have time for one more question, Chris?
We do have time for one more question, but thank you for that. I think that's a really important point. And one thing that I that some of this work comes out of efforts to work with members of Congress to develop legislation. And so, Angela, maybe you can just share a little bit about the environmental justice for all that and what that is and what that effort was.
Sure, yeah, I think that's really important to mention. In parallel with the development of WHEJAC and the executive order, Chairman Grijalva put together an environmental justice working group to develop the framework of an environmental justice bill called Environmental Justice for All. And really, over a couple of years, did a ground-up initiative to frame up and to lift up legislative language and introduced it before Congress. And it's a really important bill because it has been used to defeat the mentioned permitting deal. It's been used during the IRA negotiation, and most recently around this debate around the variety of environmental racist types of initiatives that are happening in the Senate and in Congress. And so that particular bill has, I can't go through all of the elements because it's really comprehensive, but I encourage folks to look at that and figure out ways in which you can support this particular bill. It's the most, I think the process, never seen a process like this happen at the federal level where a member of Congress has went to constituents on the ground and asked what they want in a bill, then put it forward in a bill and introduced it. So it's a really powerful piece of legislation, not just because if it gets passed, it'll be really meaningful, but in the case that it's actually building these partnerships across the country and building more power and creating more momentum within environmental justice.
I think we have time for one more question.
I do see 2 hands up here. I did see your hand. Is there a way that maybe we can state the question very briefly, pass it on to her, and then maybe we can address them both consolidated together? Yes? All right. Very briefly, thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for being with us today. Carmen Laura Bonilla from Yo Amo Verde in Puerto Rico. I would like to mention this issue for your consideration, and I wonder to what extent you've heard about this already. But I'm curious, and I think that it deserves some study and research to figure out the rejections of FEMA help to applications in communities of color. Because what we hear is of very high level percentages of rejections of FEMA applications and people going with a lot of need.
Thank you so much for that. I'll pass it over to you and give you a chance to respond.
Just really quickly, everything Angela said about the Environmental for Justice Act and its importance is really cannot be understated. We all know behind every member of Congress is the staff that actually do the work, and Chris Espinosa was that staff person.
Since those were statements, I will give them a chance to ask one question. One last question, if you could address all three together to close off.
Real brief, thank you. My name is Ramon Perez. I'm from Toledo, Ohio, and so my background is a community organizer. And what I noticed in my state, in my community, is that we have policies, we're familiar with acts and things like that are so important. Thank you for doing all the work that you do. When you come down to the community level, what really is pushing and getting the dust off of those acts and policies is community organizers in the community, because we're the ones that are the social arsonists. We're the ones that go into the community, knock on doors like a lot of community organizers I've talked to here today. We're the ones that are going out in the community, knocking on doors and telling people about these opportunities. This Justice 40, I hope that there is funding for community organizing in the environmental, and not just environmental, but across the board, because they're all connected, right? Social, economic, political, cultural, it's all interconnected. So I'm hoping that, you know, there's earmarks for community organizers, because we need support to be funded so we can go back out in the community and do the work. Gracias.
I just wanted to respond real quickly to the issue of FEMA in Puerto Rico and other places, is that it is a big issue that we've been talking about and that we know that needs to be addressed. But that is why we're saying all this documentation has to happen, because we know when it comes to communities of color in FEMA, it has not been our fair share and has not been equitable distribution or equitable service. And that's part of the whole racist systemic system that we have to address, that's been in place for such a long time. And so we have to together, all together, be facing that. And for the gentleman of community organizing, we're all community organizers. And in that funding, you have to, when you partner with people, you make sure that community organizing is really, you have to use the right word. It's community outreach, but it's really community organizing. But you have to remember, we're in institutions, right? And you have to be able to know the words that institutions use. And so when you see community outreach, it's really community organizing. And then we know that it comes from the ground up, right? That's grassroots. That's from de la tierra arriba. And we know that what has to be done is at the root. And so that's really important, is that language. When we talk about language, is that we gotta know what the white man language is, and we gotta know how to use the white man's language, right? But interpret it in our ways,
Well, this has been a really important conversation. I feel like we just scratched the surface.